Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm always glad to get your phone calls and your emails at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Emails go to talk@larslarson.com. Now, I have to admit, I always tell you if I have a dog in the fight. I use social media. I use the internet. I use Twitter. I use Facebook. I use Parler. I'm on Parler at Lars Radio. I don't use TikTok. And so I don't have anything against it. It just doesn't seem like my style or my speed. But the question arises whether or not TikTok is just a silly app for your smartphone, or is it a threat to the national security of the United States? And the man who can answer that question is Dean Cheng, who is a research fellow on Chinese political and security affairs at Heritage. Dean, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So people who have TikTok on their phone, is this really a threat to national security? Persuade us, please.
Well, so we know that there are significant security gaps with TikTok. We know that TikTok is managed by a company that ultimately has ties back to the People's Republic of China. One of the things that people often say is, "Oh, but come on, are the Chinese really going to be interested in photo editing or little cute films of my dog or my kids or whatever?" And the answer to that is, of course, no. In and of itself, it's not. The question is, what is the app accessing on your smartphone? So for people who have TikTok on their smartphone, you have to ask. For example, do you do any banking on your phone? Do you do any emailing on your phone? Do you do any social networking on your phone? That is also data that TikTok will access. And there is at least some evidence that it seems that TikTok beams or allows access to that information all the way back to servers that are often in China. Again, so my mother, my 4-year-old, whatever, what kind of data is that? Again, in and of itself, maybe not that big a thing. But maybe your brother-in-law works in law enforcement. Maybe your daughter is in the intelligence world or is a U.S. government person. It's little bits and pieces of data that can be assembled to form the much bigger picture. And for China, that's how they do intelligence writ large. The joke is that if the Chinese wanted to know the details of a beach that they were going to storm, they would first send 1 million tourists, and they would tell each one to bring back 1 grain of sand. And then
Dean, I was thinking of a comparison like that. When I was a little kid, I liked to pan for gold. You ever done that?
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm
you sit
afraid
there.
I haven't.
You haven't. But if you sit there on the edge of a stream somewhere, I used to do this when I was a kid because we lived in the woods. My dad was a forest ranger. And you could go through 30 or 40 or 50 pounds of gravel and sand and everything else, and you might get, a tenth of an ounce of gold, which back then wasn't worth that much. Today, it's worth more than a little bit. And so you say, well, you'd go through all that gravel and all that sand. And they say, yeah, but if you know how to sift it, you end up with a little bit of gold in a bottle. And that's what the Chinese are doing. If they have the ability with supercomputers or other abilities to sift through all that data, they can figure out not just the data that's there. I mean, like you said, a friend or a family member in law enforcement or in the intelligence community, but also all the intersections of data where your phone is near somebody else's phone. Oh, this little girl who's using TikTok, her daddy works at Boeing or works at Intel or works at some other company that has defense ties. What do we want to know about him? And that it allows that phone to gather that kind of data, and all you need is a big enough gold pan to sift out the flakes.
That's exactly the comparison. And we know that the Chinese have taken that kind of approach. For example, few years ago, the Office of Personnel Management, which manages the entire U.S. government's people, had its records hacked. That's an enormous amount of data about everyone who has worked in the U.S. government. FBI, CIA, State Department, law enforcement, bureaucrats in general across the system. Now, in and of itself, that's already bad enough. But imagine if you could link that data with health data from Anthem, with credit card data from Target, with credit history data from any of the credit rating agencies, maybe even your not so above board dating behavior from Ashley Madison, which set up affairs. Well, we're pretty sure the Chinese hacked every one of those organizations. So think about how much intersecting data you could then generate between the OPM data and all that other stuff.
And not just get that data, but maybe even say we know who Dean Cheng is, and we know how we can compromise him. And we don't have to. We can do it at a distance and know exactly the things. Dean Cheng gambles a little bit. He's on Tinder. And I'm saying things that I don't know about Dean Cheng, but he's a good sport. I think he'll let me do it. And they find out those things, and they say, when you approach this person, these are the things we know about him that we can use to our advantage and get human data.
That's exactly it. That's typical classic spy recruiting. It's not all James Bond, 007 PPKs and all that sort of thing. But that's exactly what you do. You approach someone and you say, are you in need of money? Are you having personal problems? Do you want us to tell your wife, your husband, about the affair you're having? That's how you recruit people to become spies. And TikTok potentially is that next step towards gaining access to information.
Dean, is there any legitimate reason why you would write the app such that it could access all this data on the phone? Not just what you need to be able to make a little video and send it to your friends, but all that other information about your banking and about all the other things on that phone. You'd almost think that if a company was worried about liability, they'd say, wall that thing off. It's great for making videos, but don't let it get into people's other data, because if you do and they accuse us, and an American company might worry about this, say they're going to accuse us of raiding their bank account, and we don't want to be on the other end of that liability lawsuit.
Well, first off, of course, the question of liability becomes an interesting problem if your main sources of funding don't come from the United States.
Right.
But the second part here is that, unfortunately, a lot of apps access a lot of parts of your phone. So this is part of why it's not an open and shut case, why people who are worried about security say, look, we have these issues, we're worried about this, but it's not a smoking gun. Because what we don't have is Xi Jinping, issuing a directive to ByteDance saying, go do this. But, and this is one of the worrisome things, is on the one hand, how much data is on our phones, and second of all is how many apps are accessing how many pieces of the data to begin with. Not your bank account information necessarily, but often your email addresses and other things. There's a reason why if you've been looking at a particular item on your phone, all of a sudden you'll start getting ads for that.
Uh-huh. And sometimes that's good. Well, I always tell people if I'm shopping power tools that all of a sudden I start seeing ads for power tools, which is an attractive feature in some ways. Some people find it irritating. I actually find it kind of useful, because then they'll say, hey, there's a great deal on saws and you can buy one over here and it's at a better price than the ones you've been looking at. That's something that's very attractive. What's not attractive is, as you say, if it's a foreign government trying to access that data so they can then use it for purposes I never intended to let them use it for.
Exactly. And what we also know, unfortunately, is that the Chinese have passed a series of laws that codify what we always suspected. And here we do have something of a smoking gun. The Chinese government has passed laws that says, you as a Chinese company, you will give us data upon request. And if that request is standing, what we think that means is that data is flowing all the time.
And it's real-time data. Dean Cheng, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming on. He's a research fellow on Chinese political and security affairs at the Heritage Foundation. We'll be back in just a moment. I'll get to your calls at 866 Hey Lars. That's 866-439-5277. Emails go to talk@larslarson.com.
Thanks for watching the Heritage Foundation's YouTube channel. With more than 500,000 members, we are the nation's largest conservative research and education institution. We believe the principles and ideas of the American founding are worth conserving and renewing. Please help us further our mission by subscribing to this channel and sharing our videos with your family and friends.